Welcome to Men's Anonymous, the podcast where men can be vulnerable and open without fear of judgment. Your host, Daniel Weiberg, leads authentic and unfiltered discussions that explore the challenges and triumphs of modern manhood. Join us as we break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and redefine masculinity. Men's Anonymous, a safe space for men to lower their shields and share their inner world without judgment.
Hi, on this week's show we have Greg Sutton, sex therapist, as we deep dive into the world of sex addiction. Men's Anonymous. Hi, Greg. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Daniel. It's great to be here. Really appreciate it.
I'm very excited about today's show. So where are you in the world right now?
In the world, I'm in the Mountain Time Zone, as we talked about, in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah, everyone, there is a thing called Mountain Time Zone. I was not aware. So I was getting very confused when Greg was trying to arrange the call with me. I'm in the mountains. I'm like, which mountains? Yes.
So, in Boise, I've lived a few other places, Florida. I originally went back to school to get my master's and worked at several different clinics down in Los Angeles for several years too, but ended up here.
Right. And you have been a therapist?
Yes.
For how many, what's been, talk me through your career, in your professional career in therapy, and how you got to where you are today. So
I got to it quickly is I was always into athletics and triathlons, and so I was in management, and then I went back to get my master's in exercise physiology, and I worked at the Y as the health and fitness director and did that for a number of years. And I also did personal training and kind of oversaw that. And I found that with the personal training, people were a little interested in kind of weight and changing lifestyle things, but they would talk about their personal lives a lot. Like, my husband and I are fighting about this. My kids, we argue. So, the personal training almost turned into like a therapy session, it felt like. And so then I went back and did my own individual therapy, kind of combined with that. Then I went back and got my master's in clinical psych. And so that's kind of what brought me there.
Amazing. So what we're going to focus on today is the area, and how I found you, Greg, is the area of sex addiction. And so when I got exposed to it through one of the guests we had on the show, and he sort of brushed over it, whom you know, and then when I went back and reflected on the show, and I thought, oh, okay, he had a sex addiction problem. I sort of went down the rabbit hole myself on the space to understand, what does that mean? So when they talk about sex addiction, it's otherwise known as hypersexuality. And then when you really dig down, there is many categories, or there's a real spectrum of sex addiction. So like, if you just do a chat GPT, they'll give you various the variety of sex addiction. So you have compulsive masturbation, you have pornography addiction, you have cybersex or online sex addiction, anonymous or casual sex addiction, relationship or romance or /love addiction, which I actually had a guest on last week to talk about that, which was fascinating. Prostitution-related behavior, so engaging compulsively seeking out sex workers, voyeurism or exhibitionism, and then you go even more subcategory, which is fetishistic or paraphilic behavior. Each type of sex addiction involves shame, secrecy, distress, and often co-occurs with other mental issues like trauma, anxiety, depression, substance use, etc. So not too dissimilar to other addictions, I guess. So how did you stumble across, or how did you find yourself specifically getting exposed within the therapy space to this particular category of sex addiction? Was it like one of your patients you had or client that you had, and they sort of opened the world to you on this, and then you went down the rabbit hole, or did you particularly study this in particular? And one really interesting thing about it, which I know we talked about in our original in our earlier discussion, was around the fact that that it is not considered by the American Psychiatric Association, as it's not actually accepted or defined as a disorder. They put out a manual of mental disorders. I don't know how often they do it, but they update it every so often, and that categorizes. And they have rejected this particular disorder as a mental disorder. So I'd love to talk to you about that. And then just for the audience know that when you look at the stats, they say about 3 to 10%, very hard to gauge, 3 to 10% of the general US population suffer from one of these subcategories, which is an enormous amount of people. Like if you
Right.
take, let's call it 250 million people, we're talking, 25 up to 25 million people suffer from this. And, it's not a very well spoken about subject, obviously, given the shame, and people don't open up about it. So let's deep dive and go down the rabbit hole of
Okay.
sex addiction / hypersexuality. That's my intro.
Well, you covered a lot there. Let's see. Where do we want to dive in?
Well, I want to dive in how you got into the space to start with, because it's not like something you woke up and said, I'm going to go study sex addiction and be a sex addict therapist.
Well, I think, as I alluded to earlier, my own therapy, I had issues around this and my own drinking, and it connected me to my early childhood patterns and those types of things and the shame. But I think it's also kind of a stroke of luck. When I was down in Los Angeles working, there's several different internships you can do
Right.
while you're trying to get your hours to get your license. And I did several, but one was at a place called Sexual Recovery Institute, and they work with sex addicts. So I found that I connected with it. I really enjoyed my time there, and I happened to stumble onto two people who are huge in the field right now, who were my mentors and who I can say are friends, which is Alex Katahakis and Rob Weiss. They have several books out. So if you Google that, I mean, that's kind of
What's
there's a lot.
what's the seminal book in the space if anyone wants to learn more? What would be the go-to book?
There's just so many now, because if you talk about some of the brain scans and the MRIs that we're doing, Alex has a great book. It's huge. It's not an easy read, but it's about affect dysregulation and the neurobiology of sex addiction. But kind of backing up, the guy who kind of is responsible for understanding all this was Dr. Patrick Carnes. In about 83, he wrote a book called Out of the Shadows. And so that's kind of, like you said, the seminal kind of book that kind of broke the ice and talked about this.
In your work in the space, why don't we start with where, let's say, the industry or the specialists within the space, where does one see the source or the cause of, is this something that is it genetic? Is it something that you have from a trauma as a child? Like, talk us through how one actually becomes one of these categories, ends up finding themselves to have the disorder.
Well, I think you said the word earlier, and somehow they really connect with shame. Shame. Either there's a very rigid household and it's very structured and authoritarianism, and they don't kind of have that autonomy and that the kind of love and support and that type of growth, or it's chaotic. And they learn, much like with other addictions, I'm going to have to take care of myself. I'm going to have to meet my own needs. I'm going to have to become self-sufficient. And so those kind of categories are kind of what might kind of breed addiction or even the sex addiction. And there's also oftentimes a trauma. You hear about big T's and little T's. A big T trauma might be like sexual abuse, and a little T might be neglect, or something like that, right? And that can cause one back to that self-sufficiency and just kind of alienates them from, or keeps them separate, like they have to take care of themselves. Yeah.
And what is the typical, or what's I guess I don't say the most popular, but the most common of the categories that?
Yeah, you brought up a lot of categories, and it's true. Like with the cyber sex, when the internet came out, right? Then you have this anonymity, this accessibility. You have, there's no cost relatively, right? And you didn't have parental controls. And so, now we're seeing these generations that were exposed to these really dramatic pictures, right? That we can find on porn if we're seeking that. And, that hits the brain at such a young age, and there's this connection or trauma to it. And so we're seeing that. And you mentioned love addiction. That's kind of a subcategory. I can go into all of these to a greater degree. I think you also made an important point when you talked about voyeurism. When you get into the realm of, is that a sex addiction or is it sexual offending? Sometimes those cross over. Someone can be a voyeur, expose themselves, and also be a sex addict, but they don't necessarily have to be a sex addict to expose themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. What as I was reading about the space, I asked myself, how does one know they're a sex addict? For example, if I happen to go away on a romantic week away with my partner and we have sex 20 times in the week, okay, it's a big number. Okay, maybe not. What determines whether both of us or maybe one of us are sex addicts or not? Or how do you where do you draw the line? Like what is the test to say that you're a sex addict? Like what are the signs? Or like I enjoy sex a lot. How do I know I'm not a sex addict?
Right. And now I think you're getting it into the realm of a couple of things. One is, I have the world of sex therapy. I have many friends in that world. And I think early on in kind of the CSAT, or the Certified Sexual Addiction, through ITAP, which is the governing body that it has 3,000 members over 35 countries. And this group, the training that we did and that we took out into the community, was viewed by the sex therapy world as sex negative. Like
what's sex negative?
It would be trying to. The intent was good, I think. Right? We're trying to figure out what's the limits of sex addiction. If you do this, if you're into BDSM, if you're into these different lifestyles, oh, are you a sex addict? And I think sometimes in the early days, maybe we, in the sex addiction world, tried to categorize a little bit more harshly, like, okay, you could be a sex addict. Let's stop that behavior. Let's work on, that's out of control. If you have sex 20 times, maybe you're a sex addict. So I think we did a lot more refining the assessments of that. But yeah, to your point, in the sex therapy world, and I can't speak for them, I'm not a sex therapist, but yeah, it was a lot more sex positive. And I think I like to hope that we in the sex addiction world have adapted that more. Meaning, okay, we don't look at having sex on a weekend 20 times as you're a sex addict. That's just who you are. And it's only when it kind of hits these categories of more addiction-like behavior that we get concerned.
So can you describe some of the behaviors that you would see which make them, I guess, maybe answer my own question, but the way I see it, and I'd love to hear your commentary on it, is that when the addiction itself, and it sort of refers to all addictions, when the addiction itself starts negatively impacting other parts of your life. So,
Right.
for example, when I spoke to the love addict, he said that he knew it was an addiction when he saw that he was like, I read behaviors of a love addict, which means they will basically prioritize that behavior or relationship or activity over everything else. So meaning they will sabotage business, like their own employment or their own business. They will sabotage other relationships they have with family and friends. And they just will choose that above and beyond everything else, which is what, you could say for cocaine addiction, for alcoholism, for any type of addiction. So when I was trying to, I guess get or visualize, get in the head of what a sex addict is going through. So can you be in a relationship with someone and only one of them is the sex addict? And I'm going to assume yes. And I'm wondering you must have patients, clients that you see that have a sex addiction, but their partner doesn't, and it impacts their relationship. So how do you help them? What tools do you give them and maybe to their partner in understanding how to manage both the person who's the addict? So like, what are the things that they can do to help them, control them, manage those desires, and also to the partner who's in the relationship who's trying to help them, not go past let's say those sort of boundaries.
So yeah, there's a lot there. So I guess first I'm hearing kind of what does it look like? What
Yes.
does yeah, and that's such a good assessment of the love addict. And I love it that it was a male, because I think oftentimes we associate love addiction with females, or they just want to be
No, this was a male.
they want to be clingy to a relationship and they give up all their social thing just to be. But
He
I
was
think
running 5 relationships, romantic, deep, loving relationships in parallel at the same time. Like, you can imagine, like, doing that with one relationship is already, like, so much to, like, if you're really deeply connected to someone, that's a lot of energy and, head space and heart space that you're putting in something. Imagine running 5 in parallel. So,
I
like,
believe, right. And, if you look at the old kind of circle, the pot with the pie slices, right? I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like work becomes this little sliver, and then social activities become this little sliver, or now something pops up with if you pursue a prostitute and get arrested, or you get a DUI because you're out drinking, and then you you know drive over to somebody to get that connection, that hit. So Yeah, the kind of the pie slices, the addictive behavior, it kind of starts to take up like half the pie, right? And, a lot of times I get people in because the partners find out about the behavior. Because there again,
Find out because the individual is having sex outside the relationship, and they're just trying to satisfy themselves, just more regularly, I guess, and they find out. That's one way.
right. Yeah, and it's not just, I want to have more sex. Yeah, there's a compulsive nature to it, right? It's not just bad behavior. It's, I have to have this. That's where they start to get into the hiding and in the shame, the secret activities. It's whether it's they go down to bookstores and act out anonymously with other men, or prostitution, or just the online hiding the porn. And yeah, it's hiding it from the partner, and then the partner typically finds out. And then that's sometimes when I get the call from the partner, like, I just found out he's been messaging back and forth with this prostitute, or I found his porn stash, or he's racked up all these bills for phone sex. I mean, those things, that's the kind of behavior that gets called out.
So then would you say that the proliferation of technology and the, exponential growth of accessibility to material, whether it be webcam, porn, cyber, has basically led to a huge growth in, or contribution to a huge growth in sex addiction?
Oh, yes, without a doubt.
And can you earmark the age groups it affects most, and male or female or both?
Well, both, but there again, typically female might look more like a love addict. And those are some of the groups that kind of spur out of that, the 12-step support groups. But I know, we get into that in a little bit. But with men, it's the pornography, and I see a lot of,
Like, is this an 18-year-old problem or is this a 40-year-old problem?
yeah, it's a good way to put it. I think it's more
Like,
40
is
year
it someone who's
problem.
married with kids and getting on with life, or is this like a kid who's just hypersexual because he's got a lot of testosterone and is super excited because he's discovered
Yeah.
himself?
Right, and that's harder to diagnose, and I think it emerges into the 20s or 30s when, back to that pie slice,
You're saying it becomes more apparent that it's a problem when you get to a point in your life, let's call it 40, where you're like more mature, more serious, where there are other things you should be focusing on, like career, potentially family, having a home, etc. And when it's at that stage, and all those desires, or the, that activity is still as desired as it was 15, 20 years ago, that's when it becomes, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah, I hate to put the numbers on it, but I think there is kind of
It's
that
like,
tendency. It's not
oh,
to say that, I mean, in the 20s, people kind of write it off as, well, I just have a high sex drive, or,
that's
I
right.
like a variety of partners, so I think that's when it gets more difficult, when you have other real life things that one takes on as you get older, and then those kind of get ignored or blurred, or it's non-traditional, or you start to see this distinct pattern.
So coming back to, what tools do you give the individual who is being challenged by this, like has the disorder themselves, like, and what tools do you give the partner in helping to, manage, not to, like, obviously to be, you talk about shame. So you don't want to encourage the partner who's dealing with this to make them feel more ashamed of what they've done, because that's sort of like, that is almost like, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why I'm like this, because I'm being shamed. But like, it's also I can only imagine a very difficult thing for a partner to be able to deal with a partner who, like you're in a romantic relationship with someone who has this. It must be very difficult.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of times I get the call from the partner who's like, uh, just kind of losing their mind. Like, I thought I knew this guy. I mean, it's not always a guy, right? But I thought I knew this guy, and he has this secret life, and all this is coming out, and I don't know him. I'm traumatized. He might be having sex with other people, and then coming to our bed and having sex, and we could spend a whole hour on the partner. I mean, they're devastated. But oddly enough, statistically, they typically stay together. I think I'd have to look at the newer research, but I think it's like 90% of couples.
Oh, wow.
Sex addiction and the sex addict wants to work on the issue, stay together.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty high number.
And we start off in the beginning talking about there's the different treatments, let's say. Okay. So there's medication. So I want you to talk us through what sort of medication you're talking about for sex addiction. There's a lot of, my understanding is there's a lot of different anonymous groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. You've got a variety with sex and porn, just sex. There's a whole lot of subcategories. Do you want to maybe explain to us like how do you complement, because you're doing the therapy, you're not doing
Right.
it's obviously a very holistic approach to
Right.
it. So maybe talk us through what's the overall strategy.
Well, first in the assessment, you kind of have to get an idea of what we're dealing with. And sometimes it's, I can do the first session and say, you're off to rehab. This is so profound and it's so intrusive to your life, and you've caused so much chaos that, you need to do 30 days in an inpatient center or at least 2 weeks at a outpatient center, something like that. And,
But
and, and look,
do they specialize in sex addiction, or this is just a general addiction outpatient?
sex addiction.
Oh, wow.
Oh, there's specialties of specialties. There's people uh, like Rob. There were tracks of gay men who act out sexually on crystal meth. So there are specific tracks that you can do in cohorts, right? Where you can kind of attack these different addictive behaviors that are very specific. So yeah, so they're standalone. I mean, there's a lot of clinics out there now. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, the percentage of people who may be having some sort of out of control sexual behavior, kind of back to the terms, out of control sexual behavior, porn addiction, some of the religious places like to call it porn addiction. That encompasses everything because they don't want to call it sex addiction. There's sexual compulsivity. So there's different names for everything, right? But I guess getting back to your medication too, a lot of times, because this is an impulse control disorder too, right? I have this feeling I don't want to have to feel this feeling. So I act out to get out of it. And then you're in the addictive cycle. And then I feel shame. And so I want to act out to get rid of the shame. And so a lot of times, like an SSRI, like a Effexor or a Prozac, those can help one tolerate feelings to where they don't have to act out, and they can look more, then we can look more at the root cause of what's happening.
And like other addictions, is this something you believe that one needs to work on for the rest of their life? Like it's like you'd never truly beat it. Like it's like they say alcoholics, they can never have a drink, really, because if they start, it will just take them back there. Cigarette smoking, cocaine, all of it. As a sex addict, okay, sex is a natural part of life, especially if you're in a romantic relationship. Okay, so if you enjoy sex and you're a sex addict, yet you want to, make love to your partner as regularly as possible, it's quite unique in that you're still going to carry on the activity because it's a natural, normal activity. Okay. But it also has the ability to potentially trigger the addiction again because you are engaging in the very act you're trying to, I guess, minimize or eliminate the addictive nature of it. So it's
Right.
for the actual individual, it must be a very fine balance of, of juggling that. Am I being addictive right now? Or I'm just like, is this okay?
Right. And that's a whole category of health. What is healthy sex? What is sex in recovery? What is, it's kind of akin to eating disorders,
Hmm.
right? If you're bulimic,
Exactly.
or
That's
you
exactly right.
have to learn to have a healthy, loving relationship with your body and food.
Yeah,
If you
100% right.
because you got to eat,
Yes.
right? So you're right. Healthy sex, and that's a really difficult part. So I think early on we did a good job of working with the childhood things that may have caused the addiction, stop go to meetings, do the therapy, do some groups, really get that under control. But then what was healthy sex?
Mm.
Yeah, especially when you talked about some of the fetishes. So someone who's into whips and chains, is that sex addiction? Not necessarily.
Not
But
necessarily.
if it would get to the point where there's sex addiction involved, can they go back to that fetish in recovery? So it gets to be really tricky. Yeah, and the answer is yes, if you really, really work on what's going on and which part are the addictive behaviors that take you and get you into that what we call the bubble, which is that like the drug addict where the prefrontal cortex is kind of shut down and I'm just seeking my drug. I'm looking scrolling through the prostitutes to see which one I like, which one I want. I'm looking for that perfect hit to orgasm to, right?
And do you see common themes or characteristics in terms of like the source or the cause of how they got to where they got to? Are they general, or is it very bespoke? Like, do you find that like uh, the addiction, the actual addiction itself is very like very personal, and it's almost like tailor made for the individual, or are there just like are there a lot of commonalities that you can draw from?
Typically, something goes back to childhood. I mean, I hate to be clichéic and like it's always something with mom and dad, or but back to that trauma, it's something that kind of mixes up, like right, like an overly kind of dictatorial father. You don't get that connection, but that is your father, and there is that connection, and so it can be as you grow older, you're attracted to more people, maybe similar to that type of behavior, but it's not really healthy. It necessarily that person can be controlling and abusive and dismissive, and so then you find yourself kind of in that pattern of I don't want to be with this person, but this is the person that I connect with intimacy or that loving bond. And you kind of mix up with your beans and your rice and your and it doesn't always have to be a person either. I mean, a trauma bond can be say a female who has her period and there's trauma around that. She's shamed, or she's happened to
Like
having
when she first gets a period as a
yeah,
young.
yeah. And maybe she's being sexual with a boy or something, and so now there's trauma around that. So unless and it doesn't mean they're going to have trauma around that, but sometimes there could be okay, so now I don't have sex. Now I don't have sex when I have my period, or yeah, there's always some sort of goes back to some sort of trauma or neglect that connects that starts that cycle.
So in your field, then basically your job is to try and understand that to begin with, help your client understand that, because that's, I guess, the way to get them on the path to understanding why, what they're going through and how they can, overcome it, I guess. Because when I hear medication, I guess the medication can be complementary, but taking Prozac, I can't, like, that doesn't really, that sort of, I feel like that sort of numbs you as opposed to truly understanding where, what, where you are and why you.
Well, that's a good point because I'm not trying to snow this person over to get them where they're walking around like a zombie. The goal is to get them to be able to tolerate a feeling
Mm.
enough to don't act out. So when they're not acting out, okay, I have to sit with these feelings. They come into the office for that session. Okay, I have to talk about what I'm beginning to discover about myself. I don't want these feelings. I maybe associate that feeling with childhood. This makes me sad. We can sit in the room. We've talked about shame, but also secrecy. There's so much shame, so they keep the secret. So they don't talk about that childhood stuff.
Mm.
It's the number one rule. Don't get caught, right? Don't get caught. Keep it a secret, because if anybody knew about this, they'd know that I'm this horrible abomination.
So they typically not share this even with friends, with, like, it's like no one knows it in their life.
Right, right. This is their secret life almost. It can be, and depending on what their kind of acting out desire is or their fetish, it can be nobody knows. Maybe just the partner
And does
who
it
they're.
tend to have other, uh, does a high percentage of the cases tend to involve other substances? So, like you mentioned before, gay men with on what do you, well,
Crystal meth.
crystal men.
Crystal,
Okay,
yeah.
so does sex addiction in general tend to have something with it, like maybe alcohol or drugs, or you can have just pure sex addicts, zero other substances that is their thing.
Right, and it depends on what your thing is, right? A lot of times, okay, if I start to drink and I'm feeling feelings or feeling lonely, or I can drive by this area of town where there's prostitutes, and I know I might not normally drive by that part of town looking for a prostitute unless I'm drinking and that frontal lobe shut down a little bit more, right? So the impulse control is is nil. So I'm trying to think of other type of. I mean, there's so many rituals too. I worked with a guy who, and this is some childhood stuff too. Um, he would go to Goodwill and buy female clothing, dress up, and go into abandoned buildings and look for men to have sex with. I mean, so there's these
So
ritual.
he's a man, would go and dress up as a woman, and then go into an abandoned building just to have sex with a stranger, basically.
Yeah,
Wow.
or people go to parks, or the bookstores, those kinds of things. But I mean,
Bookstore thing, you mentioned that before.
what's
What's
that?
what's the bookstore thing? You mentioned that before.
There bookstores, or there are. It's where you can go in, and then in maybe a section of it, there's little video booths that you can go watch porn, and
Oh,
then other kind of cruise that and hook
uh,
up with each other.
and is this as prevalent in the heterosexual and the homosexual spaces? Sex addiction?
Oh yeah, 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 and there's a lot of crossover too. I mean, this one client I worked with, so he was going to these porn shops and hooking up anonymously with men. And so his partner brought him in. And so I'm telling her, and he's telling her, this is what I've been doing for the last 5 some years. And then he
No
said,
idea.
no.
5
No.
years.
And he also had an affair with a female. And I remember the partner was so preoccupied with the affair. I'm like, he's getting blowjob. I mean, anal sex, unprotected with all these men multiple times a week. And you're focused on he had an affair just
Oh.
because that really hit home that was personal for her.
Mm.
It's not like she wasn't concerned, but it was a lot. Who was the affair with? Who do I know her? It was just like, do you see this other thing over here? I mean, my God.
But coming back to what you said earlier on, which was that a majority of the cases that you've overseen, the relationship stays intact. They work through it. Now,
Yeah. This couple did too. Yeah.
that's fascinating that you have, your partner's gone and is having, sex with male strangers in a pawn shop for 5 years, and you're willing to stick it out and understand, and be compassionate and have the patience and the time. I mean, that's a lot that the partner has to deal with. I mean, yes, the person with the addiction is they also dealing with a lot, but like the partner is like that is not insurmountable. I mean, that's
It's so much to ask of the partner, and
so much to ask.
And they've been playing detective for years because of probably a lack of intimacy, connection, attention,
Trust.
trust. Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one. But if you think about it, if someone has a secret heroin habit or cocaine habit, or they're an alcoholic, maybe it doesn't come out until they get a DUI or they get busted, and then, that's presented to the partner, and it's not okay or understandable, but okay, I've been hiding my alcoholism and now here's my drinking history. The partner's, yeah, probably upset, maybe devastated, but in some ways it's not as personal as this.
Mm.
As coming home saying, I've slept with all these people over the years. That's personal. That's, yeah, that's personal. That hurts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I'm actually quite blown away that like you have a high success of relationships recovering from that. Because a normal infidelity, I'm not sure it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on, the circumstances. But I think they're going to do a lot of couples work. And I think
Of course.
that's more of a symptom of the relationship. After all everything's out and open, it's like, months later we can look at, okay, well, we weren't connected, we weren't talking, and neither of us was trying to do something about that in a healthy way. So sometimes, yeah.
And just to finish up, my understanding within the therapy industries is that therapists themselves, those who need support from other therapists because of some of the complexity of the cases that you go through. I mean, you must have, if you're doing a lot of these cases, most of your cases would be highly complex. I can only imagine in the sex addiction sphere. No?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think it gets a little more dicey when if they're kind of on the edge of offending behavior as well as sex addiction. That can get, because then you have legal things to deal with. And obviously, when you get to people who are, well known in your community, elected officials or CEOs or stuff like that, that can complicate things as well. So,
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate your time on this. I think it's a fascinating topic. It's a lot to process, and but I think you definitely shined a light on the space and I guess where it can all go and how how much it can affect. I mean, it like what you just said there, being a CEO or an official. I mean, the knock-on effects we talked about. It affects up to 25 million Americans. Let's say it most probably then affects another at least 25 other million Americans who are either family members, partners, etc. So it has a huge impact on society. This particular area, and it's really not well spoken about. It is still in the shadows.
it is,
It,
you're right.
it
Yeah.
there may have been a book that said coming out of the shadows, but it's still very much within the shadows. If I speak to any friends or peers, they really won't know much about the subject. So really appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom. At the end of my show, I always like to ask my guests quick fire questions. So if you'd be so kind. My
Okay.
first one is, who would you like to say sorry to given the chance?
There's some previous relationships that I think I was not loving and attentive and caring. Romantic relationship. Yeah.
What are you proud of being or doing in your life?
I'd say this work. I'm not proud of being a parent, of course, but doing this work and helping people.
Amazing. When did you receive kindness while needing it most and expecting it least?
A teacher, yeah, taking support. Yeah, Pablo Aramburu, 7th grade teacher. He really took me aside and got me on the right track.
Oh, that's nice. What did your mother or father teach you that you frequently remind yourself of?
Oh, they're good people. To be good people to other people, to be loving and kind and care.
Well, you're certainly doing that in your profession.
Oh, yeah.
And what is your superpower? Yeah,
I'd probably say connecting with people at an important level when it matters.
definitely. Definitely. Greg, really appreciate you coming on the show. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you having this forum for men to be able to talk about these different issues. Really appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Men's Anonymous. Thank you for listening. For more information on the Men's Anonymous podcast, including resources discussed in the show, visit mensanonymous.com. Join us next time as host Daniel Weiberg provides a non-judgmental space for men to voice their innermost feelings and thoughts.